So just before we move on to the render settings, you'll probably notice that the image is changed ever so slightly, and I've made a few minor adjustments, and I wanted to really quickly explain what I'd done before we move on to the render settings, because it can be really annoying when someone's doing a tutorial and they've just completely jumped ahead and not explained what they've done. So what I did, if I zoom out, so I just lifted the camera up ever so slightly and angled it downwards, and that had a pretty surprising effect on the refraction and the way this looks. So that was responsible for most of it. At this point, after I'd moved the camera up a little bit, this backlight was sort of visible to the camera, so I just shifted that backlight back in Z depth just by a touch. I then changed the intensity multiplier from 0.2 to 0.3. I looked back at the bottle and I thought, you know what, I'm not liking those droplets so much. So I went into the large droplets and I changed the paint sop. I just went in and just painted in different areas to get more droplets. I went down to the scatter sop and I changed the global seed to 1, and that just basically randomizes the way these points are getting scattered onto the surface. So if I show you from here, and I just change the global seed to something like 5. It's just changing the way they're getting scattered onto the surface. I went down to the attribute randomize and changed the minimum value to 0.002 and the max value to 0.00325. All the other settings I left as is, and I just saved this to disk again and made sure I reloaded the geometry here. And if you find that your settings are still a little bit different, then you can hop into Soda Bottle V16 and all the settings are in this Houdini file. Let's take a look at our render settings and create some AOVs for compositing. First thing I'll do is click on the camera. We'll change the resolution to 2000 by 4000, and if these are green, then you can just right click and delete channels and then enter the numbers manually. We'll go over to the Redshift camera tab, and under the photographic exposure, we've already been messing around with the exposure in here, and these are linked. So if you notice, as I slide this is going up, and that's because we have the bottle ROP selected here, and the bottle ROP is selecting the render cam, so that's why they're linked. I'm just going to set that back down to 30, and this will get written out. So whatever settings you have in here will get written out into the image. We'll jump into the ROPNet again. We'll go into the Output tab. I'm going to untick this Render to Emplate option. I never use this. I always use the Render to Disk option. We're rendering current frame, so just frame 1. Let's specify where this file is getting written out. For the job, images, bottle, and we'll call this bottle underscore name of the color space, so ACES CG. So if anyone looks at our renders, they know that our image is in the ACES color space. Then we'll say bottle ACES CG underscore the resolution of the image underscore v1 for the version and .exr, and that's very important, the EXR extension, so make sure you have that. All the other settings can be left as is. Let's go over to the Gamma tab and make sure you've got these settings: output gamma mode to automatic, sampling gamma mode to use display gamma, and whatever is set in here. So under the color management, we've set our color management to ACES CG. These settings will be using these settings here, so make sure these are correct. Cool. Next, let's go to the Redshift tab, and this is where we reduce the noise in our scene. So I found for me that 64 samples for minimum samples work well, and max to 512, and this will result in around a 20-minute render, and I'm using 3 GPUs, which will speed the render up. So just take that into consideration. If you're using 1 GPU, then this is going to be probably about an hour render for you guys, so adjust those accordingly. Let's go to the optimizations tab. I'll set the reflection to 10, the refraction to 12, and the both of those combined is 22. And this is a really important section. So test out different numbers in here and you'll sort of see what happens. I'll go to the global illumination tab. These are my settings. I've not changed anything. Let's move over and create our AOVs. So we'll go to the output tab under AOV and we'll add 7 AOVs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's go all the way down to the bottom. So we want diffuse lighting, so we can leave that one as is. We want specular lighting, reflections, refractions, cryptomatte, Z depth, and object position. Under the cryptomatte tab here, we'll make sure the ID type is set to node name, so it will generate a cryptomatte based on each of these nodes here. So this is one node, bottle, large droplets is another node, and so on. Let's jump back in to the ROP. Under the Z depth common tab, I'll change this to 32 bits. I'll do exactly the same for the object position, and all the other AOVs can be left as is. So at this point, we're ready to render, but I thought we'd just organize the scene just a little bit better. So if anyone jumps into our scene, they know exactly where to go, and our scene is nice and readable. Okay, that's looking cool. Let's jump back into the ROPNet and we'll hit render to disk. So whilst that's rendering, just quickly talk to you about what's happening in the background. So if we are rendering a single frame to disk, we don't get a box popping up telling us of our progress, which is kind of annoying. But we do get that if we render a frame range. So the method for checking the rendering process for rendering a single frame is if we go into the images folder in the bottle, you'll notice there's an EXR lock file in here. And that just basically means that the render's in progress. This lock file will disappear and the folder will be populated with the rendered EXRs when the render's finished. So we'll wait 20 minutes for that and I'll come back to you guys then.